It never starts with a loud no to God. It starts with a quiet later. Later, after I finish this task. Later, after I calm down. Later, after I get through this week. Later, after I stop feeling like this. Later, when I'm not so tired. Later, when I'm more consistent. Later, when I'm in the right headspace. And you say it so softly you almost convince yourself it's wisdom. Picture this. It's late. The house is finally still. Your phone is inches from your face, and you feel that small nudge. Pray now. Not a long prayer. Just now. You even pause. You even feel it. But you tell yourself, I'll do it in 5 minutes. And 5 minutes becomes 20. Then you yawn. Then you roll over. Then you wake up the next day and it's like your soul has already learned the script. Postpone, distract, repeat. And here's the scary part. It doesn't feel like rebellion. It feels like normal life. Listen, don't brush this off, because later is not neutral. Later is a direction, and direction is what shapes a life. Most people think sin is what ruins their closeness with God, and yes, sin matters. But the more common destroyer isn't one dramatic fall. It's delay. 1,000 small delays, tiny obediences postponed, nudges ignored, convictions negotiated, quiet moments skipped, and over time, later becomes a habit so deep you stop recognizing it as distance. You just call it busy. You just call it stress. You just call it being human. But there's something happening underneath, and you need to see it clearly. Every time you say later to God, you're training your heart to treat his voice like optional background noise. And eventually, your heart believes what it's trained to believe, that God can wait, that obedience can wait, that honesty can wait, that confession can wait, that returning can wait. And what waits long enough weakens. If you're still with me, I want you to answer one question honestly, just inside your head. What's the last thing you felt God nudge you to do, that you postponed? Was it a prayer you kept avoiding? A conversation you knew you needed to have? A habit you know is numbing your spirit? An apology you should have made? A boundary you should have set? A sin you should have confessed? A step of obedience you keep pushing to the next better time? Because whatever that thing is, it's probably not just a thing. It's a doorway, and you've been standing in front of it saying, later, while your life quietly keeps moving. Here's a mirror moment that might sting, but it will save you. You don't usually say no to God. You say, not right now. You keep him in your plans. You keep him in your beliefs. You keep him in your vocabulary, but you delay him in your decisions. And delayed obedience feels safe because it keeps you in control. That's the first deeper truth most Christians miss. Later is often the language of control. It's your way of staying close enough to feel religious without being close enough to surrender. Because surrender is inconvenient. Surrender costs you something. Surrender interrupts the scroll, the comfort, the routine, the secret. Surrender means you can't keep everything as it is, and your flesh hates that. So later becomes your compromise, a polite way to resist. And you might be thinking, but I'm not trying to resist God. I know. Most people aren't. That's why it's so dangerous. It's unintentional drift disguised as patience. It's slow spiritual sleep disguised as, I'll do it soon. But soon can become never without you noticing. Let's talk about how later rewrites your life. Because it doesn't just affect your spiritual mood. It shapes who you become. When you say later to God, one of two things happens. Either the conviction gets louder until it becomes pain, or it gets quieter until it becomes numbness. And neither one is where you want to live. Some people live with the loud guilt version. They constantly feel like they're behind spiritually. They keep promising they'll return. They keep feeling pressure. They keep feeling that inner tug, but they never fully turn. So the guilt becomes a background hum in their faith. They worship, but it feels heavy. They pray, but it feels rushed. They attend, but they feel like a fraud. They're not evil. They're stuck in delay. Other people live with the numb version. That's the more dangerous one. Because at least guilt still means the heart is sensitive. Numbness is when the heart stops feeling. It's when missing prayer doesn't bother you. It's when skipping scripture doesn't even register. It's when compromise becomes normal. It's when later becomes your default setting. And if you're honest, the thing that scares you isn't that you struggle. It's that you're starting to get comfortable with struggling. That's a warning, but it's also mercy, because you're noticing it now. Here's the second deeper truth. Later doesn't just delay obedience. It delays intimacy. Because intimacy with God is built the same way intimacy with anyone is built, responsiveness. When you respond, the relationship deepens. When you postpone, the relationship cools. Not because God stops loving you, but because closeness is mutual. God invites, you respond. That's how nearness is experienced. So if your reflex is delay, your soul will start to feel like God is far. Not because he moved away, but because you keep postponing the meeting place. And this is why so many believers say, I feel distant. Of course you do. You've been scheduling God for later while your life keeps happening now. Now, before you panic, I need you to hear something gentle. This isn't about perfection. God is not waiting to catch you slipping. This is about direction, and direction can change in one moment. But first, you need to understand why you keep saying later, because it's not always simple laziness. Sometimes it's fear wearing a normal face. For some people, later is fear of silence, because silence makes you face yourself. Silence makes you hear your own thoughts. Silence makes you feel what you've been avoiding. So you keep life noisy. You keep scrolling. You keep filling every gap. And you tell yourself you're just tired. But deep down, you're avoiding the quiet where God often speaks. For some people, later is fear of surrender. Because you already know what God has been nudging. You already know what he's been touching. And you're scared of what obedience will cost you. Not because you hate God, because you don't want to lose the comfort you've been using to cope. For some people, later is shame. That quiet voice that says, you should be further along by now. You messed up again. God is tired of you. And instead of running to God, you delay because you feel exposed. So you postpone prayer, postpone confession, postpone honesty, and shame wins by keeping you away from the very presence that heals shame. And for some people, later is exhaustion. Real exhaustion. You're carrying too much. You're drained. And instead of recognizing you need rest with God, you interpret your fatigue as spiritual failure. So you push harder, you add more pressure, and eventually you avoid God because you're tired of feeling like you're failing him. Here's a question that cuts through the fog. When you say later to God, what are you protecting? Your comfort? Your image? Your control? Your secret? Your ego? Your routine? Your coping mechanism? Because whatever you're protecting is probably what's rewriting you. Now I want to give you 2 quick story snapshots, because you need to see this in real life, not just as a concept. First snapshot, a believer who keeps delaying prayer. They don't hate God. They believe. They even love worship music. They feel inspired at church. But in private, they constantly postpone. They tell themselves they'll pray when they're calm, when they're focused, when they're less distracted. But the truth is they never feel ready because their mind has been trained for speed. So prayer always feels slow, always feels awkward, and the longer they delay, the more unnatural intimacy feels. One night, they finally sit down, no phone, no music, no performance, and they don't even know what to say. So they say one honest sentence, God, I've been avoiding you, and they sit in silence. It's uncomfortable, but it's real. For the first time in months, they don't feel spiritual hype. They feel something better. They feel honesty. And honesty is where closeness begins. Second snapshot, a believer who keeps delaying obedience. They feel convicted about a habit, something private, something manageable. They keep telling God, I'll stop soon. They mean it. But soon never comes because the habit is their comfort, their relief, their escape. So every time conviction rises, they negotiate it down, and eventually they don't feel conviction as sharply. They feel numb. They think God stopped speaking. But God didn't stop speaking. Their responsiveness died. Then something happens. Nothing dramatic, just a moment of clarity. They realize, I'm not losing faith in God. I'm losing trust that obedience is worth it. And that's the twist. Because it's not that they stopped loving God, it's that they stopped believing God would satisfy them more than their coping mechanism. Do you see it? Later is rarely about time. It's about trust. That's the twist most people don't expect. You keep saying later to God, not because you don't care, but because you don't fully trust what happens if you obey now. You don't fully trust that God will meet you in the discomfort. You don't fully trust that surrender will be safe. You don't fully trust that obedience won't leave you empty. You don't fully trust that letting go won't hurt. So you delay, hoping to find a moment where obedience feels painless. But obedience rarely feels painless. Obedience feels freeing after it feels costly. And if you keep waiting for it to feel easy, you'll wait forever. Now, let's raise the stakes without fear-mongering, because you need urgency here. Every later is shaping your reflexes, and reflexes become your future. If you delay prayer long enough, your soul gets used to living without oxygen. If you delay confession long enough, darkness gets comfortable. If you delay forgiveness long enough, bitterness becomes your personality. If you delay boundaries long enough, your life gets built around what's breaking you. If you delay repentance long enough, regret becomes your routine. If you delay returning long enough, you start forgetting what hunger felt like. And the enemy loves this, because the enemy doesn't always need to destroy you with one big sin. He can weaken you with slow delay. He can drain your fire with later. He can make you spiritually sleepy while you still look fine. That's why this matters. Because later is not just a word. It's a slow rewrite of your identity. Now, I'm going to say a sentence that might feel uncomfortable, but it's the kind of uncomfortable that sets people free. The reason you keep asking God for new direction is often because you haven't obeyed the last direction. Not because God is petty. Because light is for walking, not collecting. If God has already nudged you, pray, forgive, confess, stop, start, apologize, cut it off, set the boundary, come back, then the breakthrough is not in waiting for a new sign. The breakthrough is in obeying what you already know. And when you obey what you already know, sensitivity returns, clarity returns, hunger returns, peace returns. Because obedience doesn't just change your behavior, it reopens connection. So what do you do right now? How do you stop living on later without turning your faith into pressure and self-hatred? You don't fix this with guilt. You fix it with a new rhythm, a new reflex, a new response. Here's the practical plan, simple, realistic, and strong. Tonight, do one thing you've been delaying. Just one. Don't pick the hardest thing on your list. Pick the clearest thing God has been nudging you about. If it's prayer, don't try to pray for an hour. Pray for 2 minutes. 2. But make it honest, not religious. Honest. Say, God, I keep pushing you to later. I'm here now. Then stop talking and sit in silence for 30 seconds. Let it feel awkward. That awkwardness is you detoxing from delay. If it's confession, don't write a long speech. Don't say one sentence. God, I've been hiding this because I didn't want to change. That sentence is a torch. Darkness hates clarity. If it's forgiveness, don't pretend it doesn't hurt. Say, God, I don't want to forgive, but I don't want bitterness to own me. That's not weakness. That's honesty. And honesty is where God meets you. If it's a boundary, choose one small boundary tonight. Put your phone across the room before bed, not on your pillow, not in your hand. Across the room. Because if late night scrolling is where later lives, then you have to cut the oxygen to that habit. Now, tomorrow, do this before your phone touches your hand. Give God your first 2 minutes. 2 minutes. Not to impress Him. To retrain your reflex. The first thing your soul reaches for sets the tone for the day. If your first reach is God, even briefly, you're building a new identity. I respond now. Then, throughout the day, practice fast obedience in small things. This is the secret weapon. Fast obedience is spiritual hearing training. When you feel the nudge to be kind, do it. When you feel the nudge to stop scrolling, stop. When you feel the nudge to apologize, send the message. When you feel the nudge to turn away from temptation, turn immediately. When you feel the nudge to pray, whisper it right then. Not long, not dramatic, Immediate, because the longer you delay obedience, the stronger the flesh gets and the weaker the spirit feels. But the faster you respond, the more alive your spirit becomes. And here's a line you need to remember when later tries to talk you out of change. You don't need a perfect moment to obey. You need a present one. Now I want to speak gently to the person who feels overwhelmed by this, the person thinking, I've delayed so much, I've wasted so much time. Listen to me. Shame will try to make you believe you've delayed too far. That's a lie. The fact that this is hitting you is proof God is still reaching. Dead hearts don't feel. Numb hearts don't care. But you care. You're aware. And awareness is mercy. God is not standing over you with a stopwatch. He's standing near you with an open hand. And yes, there are consequences to delay. Delay makes things heavier. But God's grace is not fragile. Grace is strong. Grace is what meets you in the mess and pulls you forward. So don't make the mistake of thinking you have to become good enough to stop saying later. You stop saying later by coming as you are and responding now. That's the real return. Not a glow-up, a turn. And now we hit the climax. This is the wake-up moment that separates people who stay stuck from people who come back. If you keep saying later, your life will keep being shaped by whatever you choose in the meantime. Because later doesn't pause life. It simply hands the steering wheel to your default habits. Your default habits will disciple you. Your default comfort will train you. Your default distractions will shape your appetite. Your default coping will become your identity. So the question is simple, but it's not easy. Who is discipling you when you delay God? Because something always is. And here's the good news, the hope you need. You can change the discipleship of your life in one decision, one new reflex, one new response, one new now. You don't have to rebuild your entire life tonight. You just have to break agreement with later. Say it out loud if you can. Not later, now. Now I want to give you a tiny, powerful exercise you can do for the next 7 days. It sounds simple, but it will expose and heal the habit of delay. Every day for 7 days, do 3 now moments. 1 now moment with God. A 2-minute prayer the moment you think of it, not when it's convenient. 1 now moment of obedience. 1 small step you've been postponing, done immediately. 1 now moment of silence. 60 seconds with no noise, no phone, no input. Just stillness. That's it. 3 small now moments. And here's what will happen. Your soul will start to feel alive again. Not because you became superhuman, because you stopped delaying the meeting place, because fire doesn't return through hype, fire returns through altar. And altar is built with time you protect, obedience you choose, and honesty you stop postponing. So let's bring it all home. If you keep saying later to God, it will keep rewriting you, quietly, slowly, steadily, into someone who believes but doesn't burn, attends but doesn't abide, knows but doesn't respond, listens but doesn't move. But if you start saying now, even in small ways, you will become someone who is awake again, someone tender again, someone sensitive again, someone who doesn't need a perfect mood to obey, someone who doesn't need a perfect week to return, someone who stops living on borrowed moments and starts building a private life that holds real fire. And the final truth, the one that should both warn you and comfort you, is this. The door back to God is not locked. It's just been delayed. So don't delay it again. Tonight, choose 1 now, just 1. And if this hit you, tell me honestly in the comments. What's the main later you keep saying to God? Prayer, obedience, confession, forgiveness, boundaries, or something else? And what's 1 now step you're willing to take in the next 24 hours?